Good morning. The subcommittee will come to order. Thank you all for being here today as the subcommittee conducts important oversight on VA's background check process. To obtain VA employment, applicants must go through a three-part background check. First, applicants must self-report information, including violations of law. Second, applicant fingerprints are submitted to the FBI for a criminal history check. And finally, the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency investigates the applicant. During each step of this process, VA staff reviews relevant information to determine if the applicant is qualified, competent, and suitable for the position they are applying to. If the background check reveals an applicant has a felony controlled substance-related conviction and the applicant will have access to controlled substances in their VA position, the VA must submit a waiver for Drug Enforcement Agency or DEA approval. Though these background checks take time, they're a crucial part of the hiring process. Even though there's been a lot of pressure to hire as many VA employees as possible, it is also crucial that the right people care for our veterans, so veterans and their family members know they're in safe hands. Individuals with a controlled substance criminal history should not, absent a DEA employment waiver, be hired for positions where they have access to controlled substances. When the wrong people are hired for the job, veteran safety is put at risk. Just a few years ago, one of VA's nursing assistants in Clarksburg, West Virginia, murdered 7 patients after deliberately administering lethal insulin dosages. Since then, there have been numerous instances where medical professionals have been caught stealing medication that is procured for veterans. These instances contributed to the more than 1,400 incidents of controlled substance theft or loss at VA, about 7% of the 20,000 total incidents reported to the DEA in 2021. Given the VA's consistent failure to get rid of its few bad employees, including in situations I've heard about like employee drug theft, it's crucial that the VA does not hire dangerous employees in the first place. Despite the importance of effectively carrying out the employee background check process, evidence suggests the VA is failing to follow the law and common sense policy, resulting in background check deficiencies. IG reports in both 2019 and 2023 highlight major issues with the VA's management of the background check process. The 2023 report outlines how the VA background investigations are often initiated late, not timely, or not properly documented in violation of the VA's own policies. Disturbingly, the report also highlights in some cases, for unknown reasons, applicants have never had background investigations done in the first place. This includes hundreds of employees with indications of a controlled substance-related criminal history that GAO estimates have not completed background investigations. The absence of these background investigations is alarming as DEA regulations require employers, including the VA, to apply for and receive employment waivers for those with access to controlled substances who were convicted of a controlled substance-related felony. Simply put, this is not optional. These DEA regulations are in place to prevent drug theft and loss, which is common at the VA, unfortunately. Evidence suggests the VA is not properly executing DEA employment waivers as well. GAO in both 2019 and 23 found VHA has zero DEA employment waiver policy in place, including guidance for determining whether employees have access to controlled substances. I'm very concerned that over 4 years have passed since the VA was first made aware of these deficiencies, and there has still been little to no progress made to improve the background check process. I look forward to all of you testifying before us today, explaining why the VA has failed to fix the deficiencies in its background check and DEA employment waiver process. With that, I now recognize Ranking Member Mervan for his opening comments.
Thank you, Chair Kiggins. I appreciate you holding this hearing. Ensuring VA has an effective and robust workforce is a priority for me. As the department implements the Honoring Our Pact Act and its monumental expansion of veterans benefits, it is critical VA has the staff it needs to support existing and new veterans entering the VA healthcare system. It is equally critical that those new VA workers have the required skills and background as we entrust them to care for our veterans. I share Chair Kiggins' concerns about the deficiencies in VA personnel suitability program that have been identified by the VA Office of Inspector General and the Government Accountability Office. I hope this hearing can help us identify ways to improve VA's process for screening employees so that we can strike the right balance of swiftly onboarding the staff we need while promptly and accurately vetting them to ensure patient safety. The length of VA's onboarding process has long been cited as a recruitment and retention issue. Historically, VA has struggled to attract and keep talent due in part to the lengthy timeline to get prospective staff to work after an offer of employment is made. Throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, the Office of Personnel Management authorized VA to use hiring flexibilities in an expedited process to get staff into positions more quickly. However, there are risks associated with instituting a quicker process, and there need to be safeguards in place to ensure that the hired staff have the background and skills needed to care for and deliver benefits to our veterans. After reviewing the testimony prepared by our witnesses today, it seems to me that a common thread and core cause of weaknesses in vetting is staffing. This is a bit circular, but it appears that VA does not have the requisite staffing levels needed to onboard additional staff. The areas of improvement identified by both the IG and the GAO all seem to center around the fact that VA does not have enough qualified personnel to run its personnel suitability program. This has created an unattainable cycle of staff shortages, causing new staff to enter the VA workforce without the completion of appropriate and required vetting. I am particularly concerned by the IG's findings related to the VA IT system that are used to track and manage background check processes. In my role last Congress as the Technology Modernization Subcommittee Chairman, I frequently did deep dives into VA software capabilities. VA currently has 2 information systems to manage the sustainability determination process, HR SMART and the VA Centralized Adjudication Background Investigation System, or VA CABS. In its review of the VA's personnel suitability program, the VAIG identified issues with these data management systems and determined the use of the multiple data systems can lead to missing or inaccurate information. I hope to hear an update today from the VA on its implementation of the VA CABS 2.0 and its plan to ensure that future systems offer the functionality needed to effectively oversee and manage the background investigation process. I am disappointed that VA did not make sustained improvements of the execution or oversight of its personnel suitability program between the 2018 and 2023 IG audits. This hearing serves as an opportunity for VA to commit to plans to improve staffing levels and data management throughout the functions of its personnel suitability and credentialing programs. I look forward to the VA following up on the coming months as to its progress. Finally, I was disturbed by the GAO's findings related to the VA's lack of control procedures for determining whether employees who have access to controlled substances have been adequately vetted. Again, this process seems to be stifled by VA not having enough staff to operate and oversee an effective background check and credentialing process in compliance with the policy and regulation related to the Controlled Substance Act. Ensuring all practitioners who care for veterans are in compliance with the Controlled Substance Act and the DAA policies is important. And I hope to hear today from our witnesses how this vetting process translates for care veterans receive from community providers. Thank you to our witnesses for being here today, and I look forward to a productive conversation. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Mervan. We will now turn to witness testimony. Testifying before us today on our panel, we have Mr. Daniel Gallick, the Executive Director for Identity, Credential, and Access Management in the Office of Human Resources and Administration, Operations, Security, and Preparedness at the Department of Veteran Affairs. We have Ms. Jessica Bongiorni, the Chief of Human Capital Management at the Veteran Health Administration. We have Mr. Sean Steele, Director of the Healthcare Infrastructure Division at the Office of Inspector General. We have Mr. Sado Bagdoyan, Director for Audit Services in the U.S. Government Accountability's Offices for Forensic Audits and Investigative Service. Will the witnesses please stand and raise your right hand and be sworn in? Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you are about to provide is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you very much. Let the record reflect that the witnesses answered in the affirmative. Mr. Gallick, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to provide your testimony.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairwoman Higgins, Ranking Member Mervan, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss the Department of Veterans Affairs, Human Resources, background investigation, and suitability programs and processes. I am accompanied today by Jessica Bongiorni, Chief Human Capital Management, Veterans Health Administration. VA recognizes that rigorous suitability protocols for its workforce are vital to maintaining the trust of veterans, caregivers, and veterans' families. VA suitability program aligns with the guidelines established by the Office of Personnel Management. Pre-employment screening and suitability determinations are mandatory for federal employees to determine their suitability for employment. Once a tentative offer of employment has been made to the applicant, VA begins pre-employment screening. At this stage, self-declared information and available criminal history are reviewed. In line with federal regulations, any issues identified during the pre-employment screening process are forwarded to a trained adjudicator for review and appropriate action. If the adjudicator cannot mitigate the issues found during the pre-employment screening process, VA may withdraw the offer. An applicant's qualifications and credentialing requirements are also reviewed by VA's credentialing and privileging staff, and if issues are identified with professional licensing or credentialing, these are communicated to HR to determine the appropriate follow-up action. If an applicant has a favorable initial screening, a background investigation is initiated at the appropriate level for the position with the Defense, Counterintelligence, and Security Agency. After the background investigation is completed by DCSA, a final suitability determination is made by a VA suitability adjudicator. This determination involves a review of a person's character or conduct that may have impact on the integrity or efficiency of the service. When issues are discovered after a person is hired, such as when a report or an alert is received by the VA from DCSA or other sources, these reports and alerts are reviewed by a VA adjudicator and HR staff. If necessary, VA or HR may initiate the appropriate action on employees that are past their probationary period. In late 2020, VA established working groups to conduct governance, oversight, and compliance, and to review the processes used within VA to initiate background investigations and the subsequent adjudication by VA staff. Process enhancements were identified and implemented for instances where there were weaknesses in how background investigations were adjudicated by VA's adjudicators. VA has made progress, but more work is needed to strengthen governance, oversight, compliance, and policies. VA is also addressing weaknesses in the governance of the suitability program as identified in September 2023 VA OIG audit. HRA OSP is developing an updated plan with each administration to establish this more robust governance and oversight of VA's personnel suitability program, including conducting program reviews at VA facilities, updating policies and oversight processes, verifying that background investigations are initiated and adjudicated within prescribed timelines, and that documentation is filed as required. The administration, and in particular VHA, has taken action to create a more structured approach to oversight and compliance. The VA HR and suitability programs are working with the VA CIO's information technology team to also address and resolve the data quality and other issues identified with our IT systems that support the HR and suitability programs. We appreciate this opportunity to share more information on VA's background investigation and HR processes and how VA helps protect our veterans. Our objective is to give the nation's veterans the top quality care they have earned and deserve by carefully and thoroughly vetting all personnel who will interact with veterans, their families, and others at VA. We appreciate the subcommittee's continued support and encouragement. This concludes my testimony. My colleague and I are prepared to respond to any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Mr. Gallick. And Mr. Steele, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to provide your testimony.
Good morning. Chairwoman Kiggins, Ranking Member Mervan, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify on the ORG's oversight of VA's Personnel Suitability Program. A high-performing screening program is critical for VHA to ensure the integrity of its workforce, to support the delivery of safe, high-quality patient care and to protect sensitive information from misuse. As the OIG has documented, VA faces significant staffing shortages across many of its programs, including critical positions within VHA. These staffing shortages extend to human resources and personnel suitability staff essential to the hiring and vetting process. We have published reports on deficiencies in the personnel suitability program for several years. Our 2018 report recommended that VA and VHA establish robust oversight, ensure reliable investigation data are collected and maintained, correct data integrity issues, and implement a plan to review the suitability status of all VHA personnel. While we closed those recommendations between 2019 and 2022, the OIG became concerned that the program was not sustaining the improved controls. Our September 2023 follow-up audit had two main findings. First, neither VA nor VHA provided effective governance of the program, and second, they lacked adequate IT systems to ensure that required background investigations were completed timely. In our first finding, we identified that VA did not consistently initiate or adjudicate background investigations timely or at all. In multiple instances, staff were in position to provide direct patient care without being vetted. These issues occurred because neither VA nor VHA dedicated sufficient resources to carry out key internal controls or accomplish program tasks. HRA OSP suspended required inspections of the suitability program due to insufficient staffing. VHA's Workforce Management Consulting Office also did not conduct program reviews of its suitability functions, largely delegating oversight to the VISNs. The VISNs, however, lacked sufficient staff to consistently perform their responsibilities. VISN personnel security chiefs reported they did not consistently review their suitability programs because they were covering for VISN staffing shortages. And many VISN suitability specialists also reported difficulty handling their workload. Our report highlighted examples of facilities that were supported by only one adjudicator, despite employee counts ranging from 1,200 to 4,700 FTE. We issued 4 recommendations for this first finding, calling on VA to refocus its oversight of VHA's personnel suitability program and implement updated staffing metrics to ensure requirements were met. Next, we found that VA's background investigation data and information systems were insufficient to track the status of investigations or conduct program oversight. For example, HR Smart data were not consistently up to date. Similarly, critical VA CABS data fields were either empty or inaccurate. While we recognize VA has now replaced VA CABS, they did not provide us with evidence during our audit that VA CABS 2.0 will address known program and data weaknesses. As such, VA may have allocated resources toward developing a system that has functionality issues or duplicates other efforts, given that a government-wide suitability IT system is in development. Unless data reliability and system design and functionality are improved, VA lacks assurance that investigations have been fully processed and data integrity concerns have been mitigated. For this finding, we issued 3 recommendations for VA to collect and maintain sufficient and appropriate data to track investigations, as well as ensure that future systems can support the management and oversight of the background investigation process. Because the issues found in this report persisted from 2018 and a single responsible party was needed to coordinate corrective actions taken by HRA-OSP and VHA, all 7 of the report's recommendations were issued to the Deputy Secretary. VA concurred with all the recommendations, which remain open. In conclusion, the OIG remains committed to continued oversight of VA's personnel suitability program because of its importance to onboarding a highly qualified workforce and because of the risk to veterans, their family members, and staff if employees are not fully vetted. Presently, OIG audit teams are evaluating the personnel suitability programs in VBA and NCA to gain an enterprise-wide perspective. Additionally, the OIG is assessing VA's compliance with requirements for vetting contractor employees. Madam Chairwoman, this concludes my statement. I would be happy to answer any questions you or members of the subcommittee may have.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Mr. Bagdoyan, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to provide your testimony.
Thank you. Chairwoman Kiggins, Ranking Member Mervan, members of the subcommittee. I'm pleased to appear before you today to discuss GAO's February 2023 report on VHA's employee screening process. As context, VHA operates one of the largest healthcare systems in the nation, with over 9 million veterans enrolled in the VHA healthcare program. VHA is responsible for ensuring that its 400,000 plus healthcare providers and support staff are qualified, competent, and suitable to provide safe care to veterans. Of this number, we identified 12,569 employees with indications of criminal history related to controlled substances, of whom 1,800 had felony convictions. A projectable sample of 305 from this universe constituted the basis of our analyses. We referred about 12,200 out of the original number to VHA for review and appropriate action. My remarks today will address our report's two principal findings: the extent to which VHA has responded to adverse information regarding its employees' criminal history or DHA registrations, and second, whether vulnerabilities exist in VHA's processes for completing and documenting employee background investigations, or BIs. Our bottom line, our findings pose a double risk. As you mentioned, harm to veterans' care, and also diversion of controlled substances for illegal purposes. Regarding our first finding, VHA received adverse information about some employees, but lacked policies and controls to ensure it responded as required. For example, VHA received information about some employees' controlled substance-related felony convictions and actions taken against certain employees by DEA. VHA was required to obtain waivers from DEA for any of these employees whose job involved access to controlled substances. Specifically, from our projectable sample, we identified 50 employees who had one or more felony convictions related to controlled substances. VHA did not request DEA waivers for 48 of these individuals and could not confirm it requested waivers for the other 2. At the time of our review, VHA did not have a waiver policy to guide its actions, but nevertheless determined that no waivers were required. Without such a policy, including guidance for determining whether an employee has access to controlled substances, VHA cannot assess whether its employees require waivers. Further, VHA risks that its facilities are not consistently complying with DEA regulations designed to control against theft and diversion of controlled substances. Regarding our second finding, we identified vulnerabilities in VHA's processes for completing employee background investigations. Specifically, we found that 13 employees in our projectable sample did not have a background investigation completed as required by both OPM guidance and VA policy. VHA was not aware of this until we brought the matter to its attention. Without adequate controls to ensure that it completes background investigations as required, VHA lacks reasonable assurance that its employees are properly vetted and suitable to provide care to veterans. In our February 2023 report, we made 14 recommendations to VHA, including 5 involving finalizing and implementing a DEA waiver policy, and others for establishing controls to ensure that BIs are completed and documented. VHA agreed with the recommendations and outlined some actions in response, including reviewing a draft policy on waivers with a March 2024 target for implementation. As of today, all recommendations remain open. In closing, I would note first that our findings are consistent with those that resulted in veterans' health care being added to GAO's high-risk list in 2015, involving ambiguous policies, inconsistent processes, and inadequate oversight. They also generally consistent with VA OIG's findings that Mr. Steele just enumerated. Second, the control deficiencies we identified could have broader implications for the vetting of all VHA employees beyond those with just criminal histories. Accordingly, VHA should act decisively and implement our recommendations in a timely fashion to enhance its oversight of and controls over employee vetting and help minimize the risks I identified. Chairwoman Kiggins, Ranking Member Mervan, and members of the subcommittee, this concludes my opening remarks. I would be pleased to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all of your testimonies. We will now move to questions, and I yield myself 5 minutes first. Mr. Gallick, how does the DEA define access to a controlled substance?
Chairwoman, I'm going to defer to my colleague here as the VHA team is working the details of the DEA waiver policy.
Yes, thank you. So the DEA definition of access to controlled substances includes anyone who dispenses or administers a controlled substance and anyone who has access or influence to how those controlled substances are administered or stored.
Mr. Bagdoyan, do you agree with that definition?
That's my general understanding that it is correct. It's access, dispensation, influence, proximity. It doesn't have to be direct access based on my understanding, but that is generally accurate, yes.
Thank you. And Mr. Gallick, are there VA employees who do not prescribe or dispense controlled substances but still have access to them according to the DEA's definition?
All right, again, I'm sorry, but I'll have to defer to my colleague to respond to that.
So yes, there are employees who do not dispense or administer, and those would be reviewed on an individual basis at each facility based on their procedures. This new review, based on the feedback that we got from the JO, is in our draft policy that we're working to roll out in January of this year to do the review that they recommended.
Thank you. Mr. Bagdoyan, under what circumstances would a VA employee who has access to controlled substances need a DEA employment waiver?
Yes, if they have a criminal history with a felony conviction for a controlled substance, and also they do not have a DEA registration, which would provide upfront sort of a dispensation that was considered. So those would be the two principal triggers. And of course, access is another issue as well, yeah,
Right.
or a consideration rather.
Gotcha. And Ms. Bongiorni, when was the last time the VA requested a DEA employment waiver?
We do not track that centrally under not having the policy in place yet that has been recommended, but under the new policy, any requests for a waiver would have to come all the way up to central office, and so we would be able to track those centrally, and they'd be reviewed at a national level.
Okay. So what is the, just out of curiosity, what is the biggest problem with doing these background checks? Is it, because we hear from other jobs that require background checks, and the length of time it takes to get them is one problem, but what do you think the hindrance is? Because I think maybe, in my personal opinion, everyone should have a background check who is directly related to care for our veterans. So what is the biggest problem with asking for and implementing background checks?
I would say staffing is definitely a consideration, but all of our adjudicators who perform the adjudication of the background investigation results that come from DCSA are trained in accordance with the standards and criteria for how to conduct a background or how to assess and the results of a background investigation. In terms of, I think the VA, we are committed to performing those background investigations consistently and properly so that we have good workforce. These particular instances that have been noted in the reports don't really have a good explanation for how some of these occurred. We're trying to improve our oversight and compliance to track those and to catch those instances where background investigations maybe were deficient or were not performed for whatever reason. Don't really have a good explanation as to why they occurred, but we're committed to ensuring that those types of events don't continue to occur in the future.
And several of you mentioned just staffing challenges with tracking, and what does the tracking process look like for during that hiring process? People that require background checks, is it done on is there an electronic system? Is it a paper? Or how are we actually charting who needs a background check, who's had one, where they are in that process? Is that adequate?
Right, so we haven't, as highlighted, we have the two primary systems right now, HR Smart, and also a new system, relatively new system, VA Cabs. We're moving towards VA Cabs being the one centralized system that captures all the data that's collected in the hiring process, the fingerprint results, the documentation that the application fills out related to the background investigation, and also the results of the DCSA investigation. Right now, we do have some of that information in HR Smart, which is our HR primary system for employee tracking, but we are moving all of that here in early 2024 to one system, VA CAPS.
Good. And then just out of curiosity, before I yield to Ranking Member Mervan, what is the security like in your pharmacies? Are there cameras on all medications, or is there especially security cameras on things like the opioid distribution machines? I know different hospital systems are set up differently. Sometimes the staff has to scan a card before they can have access to the machines. But for the medication to get in the machine, there's a lot of places where the medication has to get from where it's manufactured into the building, into the pharmacy, into the distribution machine. So what is there adequate security? Are there cameras? Is there scanning of badges to know who comes in and out of the room and who has access to the machines? Or what does that security look like?
I'll ask my colleague to address that one.
So the detailed specifics are outside of my realm of expertise, but my understanding is that, yes, there are requirements for scanning in and out whenever we are dispensing or administering any controlled substances, and we have adequate control procedures in place with our pharmacy teams.
Are there cameras installed?
I would have to get back to you on that.
Just curious if that's a requirement or not. Great. Thank you so much, and I yield to Ranking Member Mervan.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Mr. Bagdoyan, did the GAO's review of the VA's compliance with DEA policies and procedures include a review of the community care providers' compliance with the DEA policies? And how can the VA ensure providers in the community who are reimbursed for caring for veterans are in compliance with DEA policies?
Thank you for your question, Mr. Mervan. That was not something that we focused on in our audit work leading to the report. The responsibility for seeking waivers, for example, for those providers, if appropriate, rests with their employers. So with that in mind, VHA really does not have any influence on that process. At least that's my understanding. Our VA-VHA colleagues may have a different take on it, but that is not something that we looked at.
Okay. Mr. Gallick, Chairman Kiggins asked a quick question, and you had answered that staffing is a consideration to one of the reasons why the process is not up to speed. Can you take a little deeper dive of what you mean as staffing is a consideration?
Yes, thank you for the question. Both department-wide and also specifically VHA have put a good amount of time into assessing the workload and determining what are the appropriate grade levels and staffing levels that are necessary to support. As we ramped up to support PACTAC and the hiring surge there over the more recent past, all this occurred around the COVID timeframe, and we lost some momentum there in the 2020 timeframe. But basically, it's a staffing analysis where we did bring on some contractor support, do some work on assessing the workload and what would be the appropriate grade levels and numbers of individuals required to support the workload. We just have not followed up yet and actually done the hiring to support the requirements that were identified.
Thank you. Ms. Bongiorni, what policies and procedures are in place to ensure that community care providers are in compliance with the requirements of the Controlled Substance Act?
I would echo the comments of my GAO colleague that those would be the requirements of their employer. It's not something that we would administer in the human capital space in BHA.
Right, the next level with that, does the VA verify from their employers that they're in compliance prior to allowing the veterans to go to a third party? Can you identify the loophole that we're trying to hone in on?
Yes, I understand what you're asking.
Okay.
That would be something that is required in the contracts that we have with our community care providers and the overall network. It's, but outside of my portfolio.
Okay, can someone get us that answer?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. My next question is, Mr. Gallick, per VHA policy, the adjudicators have discretion in reviewing an onboarding employee's record and making it final suitability determination In instances when a prospective employee has a criminal record, what information regarding that record do adjudicators take into account when making that sustainability determination, for example?
Yes, so all our adjudicators are formally trained in the criteria and standards that are established by the Office of Personnel Management. So it includes factors such as criminal record, the debt commitment.
Can I ask, does the length of time from the violation that it occurred, is that taken into account?
Yes, that is taken into account in terms of was it something that occurred perhaps a long time ago, if it was an employee, maybe something occurred in an individual where they were in a college environment and committed some type of activity or crime, marijuana use or something along.
Is that policy on paper
In terms of the timeline, it is
for
discussed.
the crime timeline consideration and the types of crime?
Right, it's in the OPM guidelines and
Okay.
standards where that's assist the adjudicator in making that call.
How does this process take into account when state laws reclassify felony drug offenses as misdemeanors?
I would have to get back to you on that one particular question, sir. I do know that we have to comply with the state laws in terms of those type of issues, or they're taken into consideration. So it becomes an area where the staff will need assistance from OGC or General Counsel and others in making their ruling.
Thank you. With that, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Mervan. Ms. Radwagen, you are now recognized for 5 minutes for questioning.
Thank you, Chairwoman Kiggins and Ranking Member Mervan for holding this hearing today, and thank you to the witnesses for your testimony. Mr. Steele, your testimony highlighted steps VA should take to improve its background check program. Could you explain these steps?
Yes, thank you. Our work identified gaps related to people, processes, and technology that support the Personnel Suitability Program. We made numerous recommendations to establish robust oversight, commit staff to both oversight and operations at the headquarters level and the field, and commit resources to ensuring that future systems support case management for the program.
So, Mr. Steele, in your testimony, you also note how VA's information systems don't adequately support the background check program. Can you discuss this further? I mean, what's inadequate about VA's information systems?
Yeah, the IT systems were critical to the issues that we identified. As Mr. Gallick noted in his testimony, VA relies on two systems, HR Smart and VA CABS, to support the Personnel Suitability Program and track the 5 key milestones that are associated with that process. While that's not prohibited, it's not ideal for case management and complicates the issue. We also identified some functionality issues with VA CABS. For example, a field that was meant to collect when an investigation was scheduled with DCSA was meant to be auto-populated. However, we found that about 1/3 of the cases that did not occur, and the process was able to move forward without that particular field being populated. We made recommendations for VA to consider closing those gaps, which we will monitor through our process.
So what can VA do to ensure its information systems adequately support VA's background check program moving forward?
I can speak to the gaps that we identified during our audit, which were lack of functionality, the duality of the systems that impaired case management. But in terms of resources VA needs to carry those out, I would have to defer those questions to VA.
Mr. Gallick, has VA made any improvements to its background check-related information systems?
Yes, that is very important to us. We're putting quite a bit of attention and effort into the new system, VA CABS. We do have 2 systems at this time, HR Smart, to track the employee background investigation, and that data is moving, and including making automated connections to move the data from HR Smart to VA CABS, working with our CIO information technology partners to address the requirements, whether it's provide the appropriate reports that can enable staff to perform their oversight role, and also to improve the data quality so the data is accurate for each of the key milestones that enable us to track performance of those systems, so the employees would feel that they are getting an effective tool to enable them to perform their job.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Radewagen. Mr. Pappas, you are now recognized for 5 minutes for questions.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I find the reports that we heard about from OIG and GAO deeply concerning. We're talking about a breakdown of basic governance, oversight, compliance that is potentially putting veterans at risk. And so maybe I could start with you, Mr. Gallick, and just ask if VA was surprised by these recommendations at all, and if you can tell us any more about a timetable for when these recommendations will be satisfied and closed.
Yes, thank you for the question. This is obviously the report findings and recommendations highlight a number of key issues. We kicked off a number of working groups and are putting together an overall oversight and compliance plan that involved reinstituting the program reviews and on-site inspections or virtual inspections of each of the programs at each of the VA facilities. The timeline, it appears that most of the recommendations have moved a little bit to the right beyond the initial commitments, and we're working to complete most all of them in 2024, early calendar 2024.
Well, maybe I can ask you about a comment I heard from Mr. Steele, I believe, just talking about insufficient staff, which you've explored with some of the other members here through their questioning. But he said that, some of this work has been delegated down to the VISN level, but we also lack oversight in terms of what's happening at the VISN level. According to the OIG team, all 5 VISN personnel security chiefs that they interviewed didn't consistently conduct reviews of the programs in their network. So oversight is basic. It is so essential, and we need to see more of it at VA, at the VISN level. And so what are the plans to provide VISN security chiefs with the adequate support, staffing or otherwise, that they need to be able to conduct these reviews of the programs in their networks?
I'll ask my colleague to address that one for VHA.
Sure, thank you for the question, Congressman. We were not surprised by the reports, as you asked about earlier, but it did put things into clear guidelines and pathways that we need to follow. So based on the recommendations that we received from OIG and GAO, we have developed a staffing model for personnel security functions in the field in BHA that we rolled out last month. That tool is now available for facilities to evaluate how well their staffing is doing. We did increase the total number of personnel security staff we have on board by about 35% over last year, so we are making an improvement there. And then within our own office, we are adding additional personnel to perform those compliance and oversight duties and reinstitute the on-site personnel security reviews starting in 2024 once we fill our positions. So we're taking all of their advice very, very seriously.
Well, thank you for that. Another question, as part of the Cleveland-Dole Act that was signed into law last year, we enacted provisions that require VA to improve its credentialing processes to include ensuring covered healthcare professionals hold active DEA registrations. It also required VA to audit VAMCs annually to check compliance. The first reports are due to Congress at the end of this year, and I'm wondering if you can tell us when we expect to receive those reports and if you have any sort of a preview on that.
I'll ask my colleague to address that.
Credentialing is another area that's not in my portfolio, but we'll be happy to get back for you on the timeline
Okay.
for that.
Well, thank you for that. With that, I'll yield back. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Pappas. Mr. Bergman, you are now recognized for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Let's get right to it. Mr. Steele, when did OIG first find deficiencies in VA's background check process?
The OIG became alerted to potential issues in the background process when a whistleblower identified a backlog of cases at the Atlanta VA Medical Center. We substantiated those issues in a January 2017 report, but it was clear that we needed to conduct a nationwide review of the program. Our March 2018 audit identified gaps related to insufficient staffing, inadequate processes, inadequate IT systems. And we made numerous recommendations to VA at that time for corrective action.
Okay, so 2017, identified through a whistleblower, you did your due diligence, issued a report. Are these deficiencies similar to, those the OIG described in its September 2023 report?
Yes, VA has, in between our two reports, implemented new advisories and policies. They introduced VA cabs between our 2018 report and 2023, but the underlying issues remain the same. There are still gaps related to people, processes, and technology that need to be closed.
So if we're identifying the same things over and again, why or what is not allowed, what's been inhibiting VA from making significant progress in fixing the deficiencies?
The personal suitability program is a people-driven process, and I think the theme is
Define people-driven process in this case.
there is workload that needs to be completed, and there need to be people dedicated to carrying
Okay,
out those tasks.
so you've got a workload that is not matched with the humans, the number of humans' ability to really get into that workload. So are you saying you need more people?
That's correct.
Okay, do you need them full-time, or do we just work off the backlog? Are there any, folks that VA could contract with to bring in qualified, for lack of a better term, investigators, adjudicators, whatever you want to call it, to bring down the backlog? So I see you shaking your head, the answer is no. Why not? I mean, in many, whether it be the governmental sector, the private sector, there are expertises that exist that if your goal is to knock down a backlog or decrease the time without adding unnecessarily full-time equivalents, because if you add full-time equivalents, now you've got someone on the payroll, and if you knock it down, do they have work to do? Okay, so tell me, you were shaking your head too. Why is it the way it is?
Adjudicators are one of those inherently governmental functions that cannot be contracted out to.
By law, by policy, or by capability?
I believe by law and OPM requirements.
So it's not as though it can't be done by changing the requirements and the law. It's just that it's being used as a reason to not do it because it's the law, it's the policy. Am I hearing you correctly?
Yes, but I would add that it is because we are asking them to make a decision about whether someone is suitable for federal employment, and that's not typically something we would want to outsource outside.
Want to or need to? What do we sacrifice by delaying? Do we sacrifice the ability of our good people who are trying to do, the job and do it right and get others in? And who fails in the end? Where does the burden of lack of performance, lack of the ability to get it down, who does that lie with? Does that lie with the bureaucracy? Does that lie with who? The policymakers like us? Who should we pin the rose on?
Right now, you can continue to pin it on the VA because we need to be making more improvements swiftly to staff, which is what we're doing right now. We are staffing up those positions to make sure that we can address backlogs.
Some of us who've been to the war fight, when you're in the fight, you're really not worried about policy. You're worried about what have you got for ammunition or what have you got for support, and then I would suggest we could all improve. We want to work with you, but how do we do the right thing long-term, but do something in the short term that actually benefits the veterans through good adjudication and then hiring and all of that. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Ms. Sherfilis McCormick, you are now recognized for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to kind of circle back to one of the initial conversations you were having with Ranking Member Mervan I wanted to know, what is your oversight mechanisms to ensure that the community care providers are living up to their contractual obligations? Now, Mr. Steele mentioned real quick the audit process, but I just want to dive a little deeper into that.
I'll ask my colleague if she could address that.
And I will continue to need to get back to you. Community care is outside of my area of expertise.
So what is the audit process or oversight process you have? Because one of my concerns is, before I came to Congress, I worked 15 years as a CEO of a healthcare company, and one of our preliminary things that we did, we had an audit process to make sure we were living up to our contractual obligations, but compliance was always the first lever. But those who gave us the contract, they actually had a mechanism in place even before you can get paid. So that's been the priority that I've seen, the standard. And so I wanted to know what was yours, because I think that's really going to be one of the linchpins in figuring out how to solve this long-term and short-term. So I would love to get that information back, because I think that's where we're really finding the problem. I heard a lot about the policies, procedures. Policies and procedures and reports are wonderful, but we're really looking at the implementation plan so we can protect our veterans. So is there any implementation plans that you could talk about today that will assist us in protecting our veterans?
As it relates to community care providers or our employees?
Employees, community care providers. I'm really looking into the background checks, the lapse of those people who were able to work without those background checks.
Oh, as it relates to background investigations for our employees, I could speak to what we're doing internally to VHA. So as mentioned, we're increasing our staffing to try to tackle those issues, to make sure we don't end up with situations, as Mr. Steele referenced before, where we had just one person on site to adjudicate background investigations. We have to make sure that we have multiple people there for checks and balances. And so we have instituted that already across the system. We are also instituting a compliance checklist that we're piloting in 2 networks right now, based on some of the recommendations we got from our partners here on the dais, that we are going to roll out throughout the system in March of 2024.
And the proficiency of the things that you're implementing right now, are you confident that they are actually going to solve this problem, that we won't be going into 2024 finding the lapse of background checks?
Yes, I think that we are finally identifying the things that we really need to tackle with the help of the technology improvements that we're seeing.
My next question, it's really about the hiring. We looked and we see that throughout the entire spectrum of healthcare, there is a shortage of getting qualified nurses, nurse practitioners into the system. But when I visited VAs from in my state of Florida and also in Texas, they all complained about the lag time, the extremely long. We heard from our stakeholders during the hearing also that we had that employee hiring process times at the VA often can run as long as 6 months. By contract, effectively run private hospitals typically turned around the same level of paperwork no longer than 4 weeks. In addition to that, when we spoke to healthcare providers, they said they would love to work for the VA. However, the long time of waiting made it unacceptable for them because they had to take another job. What steps are you taking to actually cut it down? And I'm aware of the problems that we're having with our technology modernization as the ranking member. So I want to know what we can do on that front also to cut down those times.
Sure, I could speak to the hiring process improvement. So our team is charged with tackling that. It remains a priority for our leadership. And so right now we are doing a lot of different things in 2024, looking at sharing best practices across the system. So we look at each of our locations that have done one step in the process really, really well, and we're trying to take what they've learned at that site and share it across the system to improve time to hire.
And in that process, I'm interrupt you. It looks like you're looking at best practices. When you're looking at best practices in hiring, what has been the average rate, time frame? So you're going from not 6 months now. The ones that who have the best practices, what is that timeline like?
It's still longer than the community. And so in the places where we are doing the best, we have locations where they have time to fill in the range of 90 days. So that's still much better than our average, which is 168 days for time to fill in BHA.
And so what do you think is an acceptable time frame in this area that we're in, where it's so hard to get healthcare professionals? What is the goal time frame that you would like to see the VA in hiring?
Our goal in conjunction with OPM is 80 days for hires, but I still think that's too long. We would love to get closer to 60 days or less.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you so much. And Mr. Rosendale, you are now recognized for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And thank you very much, Madam Chair, for holding this hearing. The U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs is required to have individuals to go through an extensive background check before being hired to protect veterans, veterans' family members, and fellow VA employees. Any employee of the VA must properly be vetted to ensure that our veterans receive the best possible care. VA's personnel suitability program governs the background check process and is designed to ensure individuals hired to care for veterans or handle veterans' sensitive information are suited for those responsibilities. The Office of the Inspector General and the Government Accountability Office have both released reports that found the VA violates its own policies by allowing individuals to obtain employment without completed background checks. This is unacceptable, and I appreciate the committee's effort to search for those answers. More closer to home, we had these problems arising at the Fort Harrison Medical Facility in Montana, and it was so terrible and egregious that after an investigation was conducted, we most recently have been able to have the director removed from that facility. That is what we call accountability in Montana. I am tired of representatives from the Veterans Administration sitting here and telling us, I take fully responsibility for these actions and the things that are going on, but they continue in their same positions with their same compensation, and that is not taking responsibility. More recently, I want to ask about human resources failure by the VA. This is to Ms. Bongiorni. I co-signed a letter by Congressman Luttrell regarding Shakiba Murad, an attorney at the VA who shared a video where she was anti-Semitic and mocked hostages. The VA was supposed to have provided a response by last night and has not done so. What is the VA's response to this disturbing video?
Thank you for raising that issue. It has absolutely been brought to the attention of leaders throughout the organization. We have had extensive conversations about the importance of educating employees on appropriate social media use.
Brought to the attention, and we've had conversations about educating them, okay?
Yep, but
if anyone in this dais had conducted themselves in the way that Ms. Murad did, they would be calling for an expulsion on the House floor right now. The action took place on November the 12th. The letter was sent out on November the 30th, so this wasn't like 72 hours. The letter for request of information was sent out on November the 30th. So we've had 3.5 weeks since the act. What action has been taking place except to identify that, yeah, you have a problem?
To my knowledge, it's an ongoing investigation without final decision.
Is Ms. Murad still receiving compensation and sitting in her regular duties?
I would have to get back to you on that.
I would like to know that, because that's very problematic for someone who released an anti-Semitic video that was posted on November the 12th. Ms. Murad actively mocked the Israeli hostages being held captive by Hamas. And as you were well aware, on October 7th of this year, Hamas committed one of the vilest terrorist attacks in recent history. I'm taking this directly from the letter. During the attack, men, women, and children that Hamas did not kill were taken back to Gaza to be held as hostages. Ms. Murad's mocking of these people and their families is unacceptable and, quite frankly, dangerous to the other staff and dangerous to the actions that are taking place in the facility. And I find it troubling that you would sit there and say that we've identified that issue, but yet you have no understanding of where Ms. Murad is, if she's being compensated, and what is taking place. So this letter went out on November 30, and so I would say by close of business today, I would like to have some kind of information about her status as it exists right now, and what actions are being taken as we move forward. I yield back. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Rosendale. I want to proceed to just a second round of questions and getting back to some issues with background checks and whatnot. And Mr. Steele, is it possible that some of the VA employees with felony drug convictions have never received a background check?
Well, I can't speak to that element of the background check process. Our report did identify gaps related to people, processes, and technology that suggest that VA does not consistently complete suitability actions timely or at all. So in terms of the specific DEA waiver process, I would have to defer that to VA.
So it is possible that there are people with felony drug convictions that have not received a background check working at the VA.
There are gaps in the background process that don't ensure that they are completed.
Thank you. Mr. Bogdoyan, does the VA have a policy in place to determine whether an employee has access to controlled substances?
Policy for access. I'm not sure. I know they don't have one for waivers. I would redirect to the VA if they do, and apologies for not knowing that off the top of my head.
So would it be possible, do you think, and maybe Ms. Bongiorni, you'd be better suited to answer the question, but for someone like a maintenance staff or cleaning staff that might have access to controlled substances?
Maintenance staff or cleaning staff would not have access to controlled substances. However, in the draft policy that we are planning to move forward with in January, we are going to be issuing guidance to facilities as well to evaluate each position so they are able to understand how to make that designation of which positions have access or do not. A maintenance worker would not have access.
And in this report that will come out then in January, this policy, will security be addressed in that as well? So there will be ways to track? I feel like that's another just step of good deterrence for when people know that they are being watched and on camera.
That would be covered under other policies about how we administer and manage controlled substances. The one that we're putting forward is an HR policy.
Okay, great, we'll follow up on that. Mr. Bogdoyan, in your testimony, you note the risk that the VA is taking by not having this policy. Could you talk about the risks of not having just a policy in place to determine whether an employee has access or not?
Sure, yeah. As I highlighted in my opening remarks, it is the care or the attention that a veteran needs when in facility, and also, of course, the diversion risk. We do know, for example, that there were 50 instances within VHA where there was employee theft involved. I'm not certain whether that involved also diversion for legal purposes. So, you know, if you go by a standard of one is one too many, it's close to an absolute standard, but given that veterans are involved, that may be something to really take a close look at in terms of how certain do you have to be through processes and procedures to make sure that these potentially unsuitable employees do not have access and then harm veterans or engage in other illegal activities.
And can any of you answer just this question? When you do find in a VA facility that there has been people that there's controlled substances that are missing, there are people there that are involved in maybe some nefarious activities, what is the process done then? Is there a procedure in place that they come in and they take a closer look at each employee that has access to those controlled substances, and what are we doing to actually to rectify that problem once it's highlighted?
Yeah, so our facilities do have standard procedures to do investigations when there is an issue identified of potential loss or diversion of controlled substances. Those procedures are standard and in place.
And they happen every time?
Yes.
Okay, and Mr. Bogdoyan, when did the GAO first recommend that the VA develop a policy?
For waivers, yes. That goes back to our 2019 report that we issued, and the audit work for that actually went back as far as 2015, so that is something that we flagged quite a while ago. And of course, our 2023 report found similar challenges with the absence of a waiver policy, which is the anchor in terms of, or the roadmap, if you will, of what needs to be done. Further to Mr. Steele's point of people, processes, and technology, you won't know what you need unless you have a policy to anchor all those activities on.
So it's been a while, several years, and multiple occasions that you've asked for that.
8 years and counting, yes.
Okay, so Ms. Bongiorni, why has it taken so long for the VA to create this policy?
My understanding is that our group who was looking at developing the policy had extensive discussions with the DEA to make sure that we understood what their requirements were until we got to a point where we feel we understand exactly what they're looking for and we can publish a policy. It has been drafted now for a few months and we are getting ready to issue it.
So January, we will receive a policy, or we can find it.
An interim policy will come out in January, yes.
Okay,
So that
great.
facilities can start making sure they're doing the appropriate reviews.
Yeah, looking forward to reviewing that. And will the policy include the DEA's definition of access to controlled substances?
Yes, it will.
Great. And last question, Mr. Bogdoyan, will you be reviewing the VA's policy when they publish it?
Yes, that is part of our recommendation monitoring process. We engage regularly with VA and other agency personnel as they implement our recommendations, of course, within the boundaries of independence on both sides. But yes, we look forward to seeing that as evidence so that we consider closing the recommendation and giving the department credit for taking action. But I would point out that it has to be action in fact in addition to action on paper. Those are two different things. So I just want to make a note of that.
And we too, in this committee, will be anxiously looking forward to reviewing the policy and following up on its implementation. So thank you very much for that, and I yield to Ranking Member Mervan.
Mr. Steele, in your audit of the VA's personal suitability program, you determined that staffing is a core deficiency leading to the issues with how the personnel suitability program operates or fails to operate effectively. In your audit, you identified examples of human capital concerns throughout the personal suitability process. For instance, there's a single VISN adjudicator to address thousands of employee onboarding files at a number of facilities. In your view, how many employees are needed to fill the need to onboard on time to get to the goals that Mrs. Bongiorni talked about?
Our audit identified that clearly that personal suitability actions were not being completed timely or at all, and that could be attributed to a lack of staffing. We did not evaluate staffing metrics or other benchmarks that would guide that. VA did provide us a draft staffing model that we highlighted in our report. However, we made a recommendation that we will follow up to see where they eventually end up with that metric. In terms of specific questions related to staffing levels, I would have to defer to VA.
Okay. Ms. Bongiorni, as far as that staffing model, can you elaborate on what that looked like?
Sure. So the staffing model that we recently rolled out for facility use includes recommendations around total staffing for both personnel security specialists and personnel security assistants who participate in this entire process in the HR realm. Right now, we have about 800 total on board between those two occupational groups, and we estimate that we still have a gap of about 145 total that still need to be hired to get to full capacity.
Okay. Mr. Steele, we heard from the VA that they have made progress in implementing the new case management IT system for personnel suitability, deemed the VA CABS 2.0. Has the IG had a chance to review this updated system, and what features would an updated case management IT system ideally have to help the VA effectively manage its personnel suitability program?
We made recommendations related to the new VA CABS 2.0 system. However, our first follow-up to those recommendations will not occur until later this month. So we have not reviewed anything related to how VA has defined their requirements for that new system.
Okay. With that, I yield back, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Mervan, and the chair now recognizes Mr. Rosendale for 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. You did a really good job of outlining the process that is deficient and trying to establish a new one going forward, so I appreciate that. That wiped out a bunch of my questions. It sounds to me, just what I'm hearing here, is that the focus needs to be on the actual onboarding of the employees, that the joining the VA is not the origins of these people having different drug problems. Okay, they had these problems with substance abuse and or the felonies prior to joining the VA. So we really need to be drilling down on the onboarding process, the hiring process, to make sure that we're not bringing these people that already have problems into a system that might provide them with the means to access the substances that are giving them problems in their lives to begin with. Mr. Bagdoyan, am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yes, sir, thank you.
Bagdoyan, yes, sir. VA testified that it has been years since the last submitted a DEA employment waiver. Do you think the department was properly following federal laws and regulations by doing so?
Well, Mr. Rosendale, if they don't have a policy, which I identified as the anchor of what VA should be doing, I don't want to speculate on whether they violated something or not, but it clearly is a gap that should be closed, and as Ms. Bongiorno.
So if they weren't violating something, they certainly weren't following the intent of what DEA was trying to do then. Can we say that?
I would say that in the case of the 50 people we identified in our projectable sample, the determinations that these individuals, at least for 48 of them, that VA confirmed, that they did not need a waiver for one reason or another, that was kind of an ad hoc decision, if you will.
So again, the
not
waiver
grounded
wasn't necessary. However, they had previous problems that had not been detected. And again, this is where we go to the onboarding. And if somebody has a problem, why? I mean, are we gonna take a kleptomaniac and leave them in charge of security of the store? I don't think so. Okay, so don't expose them. Ms. Bongiorno, I hope that you're now clear on DEA's guidance. How many current VA employees require employment waivers but don't have them?
That is one of the things that we'll be reviewing when we roll this policy out.
Do we have any kind of estimate whatsoever? Is this some numbers that you can provide to us within the next week?
When we do the review, so when we roll out the draft policy, as well as the guidance for facilities about how to do the review, we will be able to provide you additional information.
Okay, Ms. Bongiorno, in 2021, VA accounted for 7% of DEA's total reports of theft or loss of controlled substances. Have any of these incidents involved employees with a criminal record?
I would need to get back to you on that.
Okay, because again, I'm drilling down, trying to get to the point that what we need to be focusing on is the pre-employment. We have to be focused on the onboarding of these employees so that we're not putting people in a position where that they can be a danger to themselves and others. Do you think that having a controlled substance policy that complies with DEA regulations could help reduce those numbers?
I do think it could help, but I would offer that right now we are following the personnel suitability requirements that are in place already from OPM. And we also are reviewing to make sure that people have appropriate unrestricted licenses. And any type of felony conviction would tend to have some kind of impact on licensure already. So that's reviewed in the credentialing process as well.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. I would yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Rosendale. I just want to thank our committee members and especially those of you who came to testify before us today. So thank you very much. I know there's work to be done. It was very educational for me and I'm sure the other members to hear of the good work that you all are doing. I feel like the opioid crisis is a crisis, right? We are working to just make positive changes in all facets of it. I feel like we've done a good job. The DEA works hard with providers. As a nurse practitioner, I know that we are very much, we have a drug database. We are careful about our prescribing habits. I think that the VA does a good job of ensuring patient safety through things like drug contracts and drug screenings and just really watching how we're prescribing opioids. But this is kind of the back end of that loop. So just curtailing that, again, nefarious activity, we've made it harder to get opioids, which is a good thing. So we need to close the loop on the back end to make sure that we are the employees that we're hiring, not just for patient safety, but cost too. I mean, there's costs associated with that type of theft. So making sure we're doing all of the right things to provide the best care for our veterans. So thank you for all the good work you're doing, and thank you to our members. And I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include any extraneous material. Hearing no objection, so ordered. This hearing is now adjourned.